I'd like to welcome you to a tour of the historic orchards at Seed Savers Exchange. It's kind of a big year in that this is the 30th year for the trees in this particular orchard. Kent Whaley and David Sleva and myself were on hand to kick this thing off back then, and it's kind of fun to see it still going and full of trees and full of fruit. There's a lot happening in the orchard. We'll fill you in on that today. Jenn Ripp here to my right is newly appointed assistant orchard manager. So I'm really excited to have a helper on board here, and that's going to make a lot of difference in the care the trees get. The whole idea is to preserve germplasm, just like the whole idea of the rest of this organization, saving seed varieties. These are not grown from seed, but it's still genetic diversity that we're trying to preserve here. The orchard has grown over the years and now holds roughly 1,000 varieties or more. And that has its own set of issues. We are cramped for space. We've had a fundraising drive going on lately that has raised good money, and we're going to use it to shrink our backup trees. Essentially, we try to grow 2 trees of each variety so that if something happens to one, we have a backup we can go to, one on file, so to speak. And that revitalization campaign is you'll see in a bit, turning into trellised dwarf trees that take up less space. So we'll have room for a freestanding tree of each variety.
And that's part of the revitalization of the orchard, is putting these trees onto high density trellising, one, to take up less space, but to also have a category system. Unlike seeds that are kept in our vault, these trees need to be regrafted every 10 to 20 years to keep the germplasm alive. And so we look at this as a living museum.
Absolutely. Simply said, a large full-grown tree can live a long time, 50, 60, well cared for, I'd say 100 years. A dwarf tree doesn't have that same lifespan. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. A dwarf tree produces fruit sooner, but it doesn't live as long, and a standard tree will take longer to produce fruit but live 2, 3, 4 times longer. What are we looking at here?
We are looking at the Geneva crabapple here. It is one of the original commercial crabapples from the 1930s. It is an excellent addition to any cider. It has a nice tangy taste to it with high acidity, pretty tart, and then a really lovely rosy pink flesh on the inside.
I love the fact that this fruit has an incredible amount of wax on the skin. Shines up beautifully, but that wax prevents fungal attack. If you look this tree over, you'll see no sign of any of the common summer diseases on the skin,
including a fire blight in the tree, which is really important when you are trying to preserve historic varieties.
But see that has a nice bright red flesh that, as this gets more and more ripe, it gets redder and redder. It is really a tart and tannic apple, meaning cider makers are pretty interested in it. It would make a pink cider once squeezed. But that's one of many varieties we grow here in the orchard. We've moved on down the path a little bit, and this is a grand old tree, one of the originals, and this is known as a famoose or snow apple. And Jen, can you tell us a little more about it?
Sure. So this is a really common kind of homestead apple because it's good for its storage qualities. It's good for fresh eating as well as kitchen uses. It was originally thought to be from France, but it was populated in Canada and the Quebec region by early settlers in the 17th century. After that, it traveled down to the U.S. to become popularized across the Midwest.
I knew this apple before I even moved up here to Winnesheek County back in the 80s. I'd been living in east central Iowa, and quite a number of farmsteads in that area where we were had famoose or snow apples in their orchards. So I was familiar with that before I even learned there was such a thing as historic and heritage apples like this.
And the name Famouse is thought to have come from the village in France that it originated from.
And our U.S. name snow apple comes from the fact that it's got a pure white flesh. So I've mostly made applesauce out of it. Now we've come to another tree in the collection. This is a northern spy, common old farmstead tree. Jen, what do we know about it?
Yeah, we know that it first came into circulation in 1841. It was thought to be seeds from Connecticut, actually.
We're filming this, it's early August. This apple's nowhere near ripe. It'll be ripe end of September into October. And I think of it as a storage apple. If you think about this country settled by farmers, no refrigeration to speak of. Before we came up with refrigerated freight cars and trucks, you grew your fruit locally and you stored it. A good storage apple like this was really important. Again, it's early August and I'm starting to get a few ripe apples in the orchard. I finished eating the last of my storage apples in the first week of May this year. And from the first week of May till end of July is not a big time to fill with other fruits. And so the apple was the mainstay of the fruit in a farmer's diet. And so the quality of keeping is really important, especially in that pre-refrigeration time period. And that's just fascinating to me that we have apples that are selected for these different uses. Storage is one. A lot of early apples went into cider. It was a reliable drink, safe, and that it wasn't, if the groundwater is polluted, you can always drink cider, kind of thing. Then all the baking, saucing, pie. Certain apples are known for good dryers. I make a fair number of dried apples every year, and I'm not married to one variety or another, but any good sweet apple will make a nice dried apple chip. And I do lots of that with our fruit. That is just yet another reason why we have such incredible diversity. As we realize that this tree had this quality and that tree had that, we gave names to them and distribute them. I think the practice of grafting was once really pretty well known in the countryside. That brings me to the fact that apple trees, their flower structure is such that they do not self-pollinate well. So to reproduce this tree and keep it true to name, we have to reproduce it vegetatively. The best method for that is grafting. We generally teach a grafting workshop here. There's all kinds of resources that you can find online as well to learn grafting, but with that skill set, I can take a piece of new growth off this tree and borrow some buds off of it. There's new buds behind the leaf petiole on each stem, and graft a new tree. That's vegetative propagation, and I can then pass that along to my friends and neighbors. It's a really cool skill to have.
It's also an excellent way to spread varieties throughout the country because you can graft pretty much any apple onto any rootstock. So it makes it a lot easier to be able to mail these varieties around the country.
The Seed Savers Exchange, that word in the name, exchange, is simply that. We have a large network of gardeners who exchange seeds with each other. Well, we do the same thing with apples, and that in the exchange listings you can access our apple trees and request scionwood. So if you know how to graft, or you know someone who does, you can request scionwood. There's a handling fee, but we'll ship you scionwood in the early spring. Usually 4 cuttings, really plenty of wood to make several trees with, and away you go. You can access a large portion of this collection through that system.
Mm-hmm. And not only can you get the exact variety that you want and is appropriate for your region, but you can also have fruit production in 3 to 5 years versus up to 8 if you're just growing out the rootstock. Mm-hmm. Except for this one, it is known to be a pretty late producer. Historical notes say that it takes up to 10 years to have a healthy harvest from it. So slow to get going, but as you can see, a very, very vigorous tree.
Okay, we've changed locations. We are now at the Goldman Orchard. It's the same collection, it's just another space on the same property. We're north of where the office buildings are here at Seed Savers. And this is a newer orchard. It was built to facilitate the growth of the collection. I believe the first trees were planted in here in 2013. And so it's younger. But it's very important still as a place to plant out these trees and let them grow on and be a good example. So with that, let's go take a look. We stopped at this one first. It's a Black Ben Davis. It has a long history of commercial use in the upper Midwest, so I think Jen knows a little more about it than I do.
Yeah, so it's from Captain Ben Davis, who was apparently an apple cultivar. In, I think, 1905, it was the most cultivated commercial tree in America. And 100 years later, it's practically unknown. So there's many versions of Ben Davis trees in the group. This is the one variety of Black Ben Davis.
Yes, I've read that this was grown extensively in huge quantities and packed into barrels and even shipped to Europe from the U.S. It does have a long shelf life. Probably isn't the best eating apple, but that shelf life quality made it advantageous for shipping. So there's another one just down the way we should go look at. This is a distinguished apple in Iowa apple history in that it's known as the Hawkeye Delicious, and it is the origin of all the delicious apples you've ever eaten. So it's got quite a heritage behind it. So Jen, can you fill us in on that?
Yeah, definitely. So delicious in taste, but also in the name. You're familiar with the Golden Delicious, Red Delicious. These all originated with this tree here, which was found through a fruit expedition by the Stark brothers, who were looking for new apple varieties. And the original grower, had sent in a specimen of the Hawkeye Delicious one year, but somehow his name got disconnected. So the Stark brothers were wondering, what the heck apple is this? It's so good. And luckily he came back the next year too, and they were able to buy the rights to this Hawkeye Delicious and patent it, and start a delicious empire.
The rest is history. Yeah. So I think that's quite a nice piece of heritage to have in this collection. This collection is open to the public. The gates are never locked, so you can come in and walk at any time you want. It's quite an opportunity. Starting now in early August, there's a few ripe varieties now, but as we get later in the season, there will be dozens, if not more, varieties ripe. We invite people to walk and taste. All we ask is that you not take the last fruit on any given tree, because we do use the fruit to do evaluations that for our records, for the data we collect on the different varieties. We are working with a cidery, number 12 cidery in the Twin Cities. They're making use of a lot of the fruit. If you're interested in quantities of fruit, you should contact us, and we'll talk about what you need and go from there. But as far as just coming and enjoying the orchard, it's a great place for a picnic. We get into early October and you won't be able to taste all the varieties you find. One of the priorities we use in collecting these apple varieties is that they had a history of use in the Midwest, be it commercial or just farmstead use, but that's important to us. Situated here in Northeast Iowa, we want to have a representative sample of what would have been grown on the farmsteads and in orchards in the area historically. That kind of thing can be verified by something like this. We've been reading up, and here's an article that has a photo of an ad that was put out by a local nursery, or orchard rather, in 1927. This was an orchard that was just, it says 4.5 miles southeast of Decorah. And it says, winter apples, your choice of Northwest Greening, Melinda, Ben Davis, Gano, Tolman Sweet, Famous, that are thrice sprayed, hand-picked, graded for $1.25 to $1.50 per bushel. That was the Goldman Orchard. We have all those varieties in this collection. Some of them were actually collected from the Goldman Orchard. I love this, that he says, call anytime except Tuesday and Thursday. I'm wondering what he did on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But anyway, that's a connection. That shows us that a commercial orchard was growing. They had Hawkeye Delicious in this. I've got a list of the trees they grew. And so that's the kind of verification we're looking for when we accept trees into the collection. We just came up the hill in the Goldman Orchard. You noticed probably we came through an old corn crib that's now the front gate. Here at the top of the hill, we've put another corn crib up in an attempt to use some historic kind of vernacular architecture from around here. But we've converted it into a little sitting area. Another way, we're just saying you're welcome to come and spend time here. This is a space that's open for anybody to use. Again, the gate's never locked, so just come and enjoy it. So we've talked about this incredible diversity that we hold in this. You know, if you scan the orchard here, there's trees in every direction, and every one of them's different, and it's just an unbelievable thing to walk through and experience. So I'd highly recommend you do that sometime. And certainly spring apple blossom time is pretty wonderful, but fall when the fruit's ripe is is probably even better because you can actually taste it. From here, we have, and I mentioned earlier, the orchard revitalization project, and that's an attempt to put one of every variety on a dwarf rootstock, planted on a trellis system to support them. There's one of those. The first installation is just over the hill here, right, kind of behind this crib, and we're going to go to that now and look at what we're doing there. Okay, this is the first installment of plantings on a high density system here. That's part of the revitalization program. The whole idea is to put trees on a dwarf rootstock. These fences are 8 feet tall. On a dwarfing rootstock, we should be able to keep the trees from topping that out by too much. They're 3 feet apart, 12 foot between the rows. That's a lot less space than 25 feet apart up in the orchard. Even for a semi-dwarf tree, that's what we need. With a standard tree, we need to be 40 feet apart. Just takes up a tremendous amount of acreage. So these will be our backups. We can get scionwood off of them. As they grow, they'll be tied to the wires as they grow up. Side branching can be tied down and trained out the wire. I think it takes quite a bit of pruning to maintain these. That only encourages more new growth, and therefore the scionwood we really need for sharing these trees around is readily available. It remains to be seen. We may run rigid stakes up through here as something to tie them to as well. Our main priority is not fruit production. That's kind of a byproduct of this whole thing. We really want to make a good scionwood so we can share these varieties. If I can take this given variety and send it out to a dozen gardeners around the country, it's no longer such a rarity. That's our goal here. We want to bring light to the fact that these are worthwhile varieties and get them out there so they're not so endangered. We'll never know. Just like the Seed Saver organization, the whole idea is to preserve diversity in crop systems. Apple's no different. We can't grow these from seed; they don't come true, but we can propagate them in their own way. And we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what the future will bring. We don't know if this tree has a quality that we might want in the future. So to let it just fade away, become extinct, it's probably a bad idea. We may need that waxy coat, resistance to disease. We may need an apple that's got loads of sugar. We may need an apple that has a nice tannic quality to it. Who knows? So it's the past as well as the future. Thank you so much for joining us on this virtual tour of the orchards at Seed Savers. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and I hope to see you here someday.